Right. Okay. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining this webinar on community engagement. So I think, it's really important as community groups that we engage with and are representative of our community and are thinking about the needs of the community as well. I chair a friends group where I live in Mitcham, and it's something that's always on my mind, but I also always think I could do better. So I'm really interested to hear about Suze's experience in the Up Garden in Newham. Her group's been recognised by the RHS for their work in this area, and she kindly did a presentation for us, I think it was about a month ago, on sort of a related topic. And, we kind of realised that there was actually a lot more to say. And so she's going to talk about her work on community engagement with her group at the Up Garden, and then we'll have time for Q&A and also some general discussion, so we can all kind of share our experiences in this area and hopefully learn from and inspire each other. With that, I will hand over to Suze now.
Hello. So I'm going to attempt, we've been doing some troubleshooting this morning, to get to my slides. It's probably going to show one screen first that you don't want to see, and then I'll pop out and then it'll come back in again. That seems to be the way to do it for some reason. So if I go into this interview.
God, what a way to live.
So you're going to see a bit too much information first. And then does that now show just slides rather than my notes?
Yeah, that looks good.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Okay, so I can't see you at the moment. Laura's going to let me know if there's any kind of interactions and sort of shout outs. Yeah, so thank you for inviting me to speak. It's nice to be back. Apologies if you already know all this, but it's worth saying anyway, just in case. But I'm going to start off taking you through the trials and tribulations of how a group of residents transformed an abandoned council estate yard into an RHS award-winning community garden in under a year. We'll then have a Q&A on that content, I believe, and then I'll pick up from the point where we had just one up to where we are now. And you should hopefully see whether it's before the Up Garden was created or during the creation and continuing now since launch, and even with our future plans, we keep coming back to the concept of community. And then I think we're going to end on a group discussion to share experiences. Hopefully you can now see my next slide.
Yep, looks
Yay. Good. Okay, so I'll start by introducing myself and how the idea of the Up Garden came about. So I live in Forest Gate, which is near Stratford of the Olympics, though I was born and raised on a Leeds council estate by semi-immigrant parents. I used to be a lawyer, but after having my youngest child in 2019, for various reasons, I became a stay-at-home parent. And at the time, I was often pottering through the council estate that the Up Garden is located in, because the estate has a nursery and my kids went to that nursery. I knew a few people who lived around there, and I remember during the COVID restrictions, my kids were able to play in our back garden because we have a house. But many of the estate kids live in flats with no gardens. And when we were putting out bins or whatever, my neighbours and I were still able to have our, socially distant, passing chit chat over front garden walls. So we were still able to maintain a small sense of community, even in, when we're all sort of locked down from each other. But flats are typically, a rabbit warren of narrow corridors to your own doors that don't really allow for socialising. Prior to this house, I lived in flats and I never really knew those neighbours at all. There is plenty of research out there demonstrating how valuable these micro connections are. A decade ago, a UK study found that weak ties, which are your acquaintances, your familiar faces, friendly strangers, as opposed to strong ties like family, friends, and colleagues, are really important for how socially connected we feel. And on days when a participant had a greater number of casual interactions with weak ties, so a neighbour, a barista in a local coffee shop, a fellow dog walker, they experienced more happiness and a greater sense of belonging. And the more clubs or associations or teams a person belonged to, the more they felt a sense of security and meaning. And so I realised that having gardens, front, back, is really important to our physical and mental health, but it's also a luxury for some. So this is the estate. It used to be all Victorian terrace housing, all of it, with front and back gardens. And then what became the estate was bombed really badly in the Blitz. And so housing had to be built very fast. So I get it. So we have 7 multi-story blocks. So let's see if I can get my little laser pointer up. Do you have a nice little red dot?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a multi-story block here, 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 and here. We've got a tower block, and then you've got 5 large asphalt yards. They're kind of there. Where's the other one? Yes, there. There's there. There's one here, and then that's your garden. And so residents back then, they would come across each other when they were doing laundry. And we have anecdotal evidence that children would use these yards for games and sports. There's a small community centre there that had activities for all ages, different groups. And then you've got various patches of grass that you can see around. But things change over the years. And so that community centre has been a private nursery, the one that my kids went to for a number of years now. There's no intergenerational kind of contact there. The yards largely stopped being used decades ago. Like, people don't just leave their laundry out in public anymore. And at some point, the council added railings to almost every patch of grass. I presume in response to complaints of people hanging out on them and being noisy or drunk or whatever, but I don't know. And I don't know if there were ever any public benches on the estates, but there certainly are not now. Councils preventing access to public realm or amenities because of a troublesome 1% is a real bugbear of mine, because it punishes the 99% of law-abiding citizens, and it never deals with the underlying problems. So either it just moves elsewhere, or it just reappears in the same place in a different guise. And case in point here, by removing the opportunities for residents to stop for a rest or a chat, to get to know each other's faces, to allow a community to form at all, it turned the estate into a walkthrough and increased other antisocial behaviour like littering, graffiti, drug taking in corners. And you can see the issues that this particular estate suffered from, which I don't think is entirely unconnected. It ranks in, at the time, it ranked in the top 20% of the country for low income, high crime, most deprivation, really high for flood, heat, overall climate risk, and the need for public access to public space. I think community gardens are plugging this erosion in local authority provision, and have been for quite a long time now, because it's the people who live in the area and walk around every day who will spot these unused patches of land and want to put it back in use. It's not a council worker that does that. They're all too strapped for cash. They don't send people to go do walkabouts and find out, what they've got. They don't know half of the land they've got. And I think they're doing it because they want to improve where they live. And, I did lots of research about community gardens before I created the Up Garden. And, many initially will say that they want to see, more plants and wildlife. But I found that after the gardens were actually created, the biggest impacts on people were actually having somewhere to hang out. And that allows a community to form around it. And consequently, that makes the area safer, because it now looks cared for and is frequented. Antisocial behaviour, doesn't want to be where there's witnesses, basically. And so to me, community gardens and other public green and blue projects actually are a form of rebellion and social and political activism, just in the most polite British of ways. So back to field estates, which is what this is. So the locals that I knew would complain about everything I've just said before. So I approached the local council and the housing association, who own and manage the estate respectively, about creating a community garden. But it was on this unused, there should be little dots in between the tower block and the community centre, which is the nursery now. That's a railed off piece of land at the back of the nursery. Pause on that. I needed to secure 10% match funding, which meant tracking down the right person in lots of different council teams and convincing them why their team should be involved, why they should give us money, why they should create additional work for themselves, which I did by pitching the long-term benefits of community gardens, which you all know, and also quoting their own COVID recovery strategy and the local plan back at them. They were both really, really excited by the idea, but well, for reasons I won't bore you with, it's very boring. They were very nervous about transforming that particular piece of land, the one with the pointer on it now. And as you can see, it has lovely lush grass. There are mature trees just behind the tower block peeping out there. And so I thought at the time we just needed a few raised beds, some better planting, some edibles, some seating, a very achievable project for a newbie. But instead, they suggested this yard, 900 square meters, of just asphalt slabs and impenetrable weeds. There's no trees, no grass at all. Just my next slide. See if it's just going to catch up with us. There we go. So I was horrified. Until recently, I'd been, a lawyer living at my desk, doing 60 to 100-hour weeks. I'd never done anything like this before. I didn't have time to. I couldn't even look after my own garden. I am terrible at DIY. I was basically lacking all of the key skills that you would expect me to have. However, being a lawyer it's just project management. It's just in a very high stakes environment. And I cannot bear wasted public realm. No. And I could see how much more could be achieved with this much bigger space. I said it's 900 square meters. And I'd already done the hard work of getting the council and the housing association on side. And I was already really, really connected to my local community, I like people. I find people interesting, like their jobs, their hobbies, experiences, all of that is really interesting to me. And I knew that even if I didn't know anything about gardening or landscaping or building planters, that Forest Gates would have a wealth of people who did and who would want to donate their time and help because of there's a really strong community spirit here. I just had to find the overlap between them. So the idea of the Up Garden came from conversations I was already having with people I already knew who lived on or closest to the estates because theirs was the most important voice. I then consulted the wider local community using an electronic survey, as I knew the vast majority of residents would want to engage that way. It automatically saved the results into a spreadsheet, which could create data charts that would be ready to include in the grant application, which is a good tip. And it functioned as a future database of who wanted to help, their availability and their skills if we got the grants by the questions that I was asking. But I also created a paper version, which was hand delivered to every single estate household. And the nursery and the community centre agreed to be the drop-off point for completed paper surveys, because it was really important that as many barriers as possible would be removed from these closest residents from being able to have their say. The particular ward that we're in Forest Gate, which I was principally aiming at, it has around 3,800 households. The consultation, and obviously I didn't reach that many households. The consultation could only run for 2 weeks because negotiations with the council and everything had squeezed the timeline quite a bit. But still, almost 240 households responded, 98% were in favour, and over 160 households volunteered in some way to give help. And the council said that it was the most engagement the ward had ever had to any community consultation, including their own consultations, which I think maybe doesn't reflect so well on them, but I just think there's no excuse for there's no comparison to actually being in the community. I mean, as you'll know, it's really crucial to gather input and also demonstrate that you have taken it on board, because as well as preventing unnecessary issues, you need the community to feel protective of what the space becomes, and for that they need to feel a sense of ownership in the first place. We were thrilled to be awarded the GLA grant, and I then set up a steering group of stakeholders to oversee the project delivery. That's like council people, and a working group comprising a rolling membership of local residents split into different teams per skill area. You know, I had Gantt charts and spreadsheets and layout designs, but it doesn't matter if you do all that planning, you're just always going to have problems coming up. And right from the off, we were on the back foot. We were supposed to start the project in November 2021, but our first grant instalment was 5 months late. And it took a lot of pulling of strings to convince the groundwork subcontractors to start in February 2022, which then reduced our delay to only 2 months instead of 5. And we volunteers finally managed to get in April, which gave us only 7 months to complete the transformation. The largest circle, you can see a satellite view, which shows not much having been achieved, and there was only 5 months left in the timeline at that point. In the interim, the steering and working groups continued working on what they could whilst all the funding issues were getting sorted. However, Brexit, the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, they all raised labour and material costs from the quotes that we'd got only a few months before, meaning that we had an original plan to retarmac it's very lumpy asphalt, and we want to retarmac all the walkways to make it wheelchair accessible, but that got crossed off the list, and we just did the patching of the worst areas. You can see the little sort of black patching here and there on some of the other circles. We discovered really severe Japanese knotweed, and we lost a whole 60 square meters to a fenced off contamination zone. That's the leftmost circle. And a good chunk of the initial layout design was also just thrown in the bin because we couldn't use that area. There was a knock-on effect with the Japanese knotweed due to the risk of it spreading. The original plan that we had for semi-mature trees to provide lots of shade and raised beds to make use of the natural ground moisture, that just had to be abandoned in favour of planters, planters, by which I mean boxes with bases, which require more materials and labour time. And due to my inexperience, this was my bad, I did not realise that ordering 23-ton bags of compost, sand and soil did not mean that they would actually come in the said bags. They were delivered loose in 3 huge mounds, which you can see in the right side circle. And that exposed them to the elements and weeds and took up a key area, meaning our shed ended up in a less than ideal spot and another layout reshuffle. Due to so many issues with that, I then had to substantially re-strategize the project to ensure we could still meet the deadline, which should have been the working group's remit, but by that time, almost all of those volunteers no longer had capacity. So I also had to carve out additional time for an urgent recruitment drive and get all of the new working group up to speed. Hopefully, why is this working? There we go. Can you see slide number 5?
Yep.
Oh, great. I would say, and this comes from being a lawyer as well, there is nothing better than an impossible deadline to help you focus and identify the key achievable objectives. So many lovely things got crossed off the list at this point or moved down the list. But there were silver linings. The cost saved from not retarmacking all of the walkways went towards the turf area, which we increased to 160 square metres. And we changed it from regular grass to a biodiverse rich turf. Instead of creating a raised bed, we left it in its natural state, turning it into a mud lab for open-ended play. That's the one with the girl with the yellow cardigan. Open-ended play is really important to the Up Garden. Conceptually, open play is a natural fit, I think, with community gardens and forest school ethos. But another handy advantage we discovered is that this area had brambles, but we find the constant digging by the kids actually reduces how much work that we have to do. The Japanese knotweed had killed the original idea of a children's garden. So instead of paying to cut down 3 really large tree stumps that we've been left with, we were inspired to keep them and make a feature of them. And we decided to create a raised stumpery area to attract insects and showcase shade-loving plants. That's the leftmost circle. And the fencing that contains the Japanese knotweed provided a perfect location for a vibrant mural donated by neighbouring artists. And the tire planters intended for the children's garden found a better home there, actually. And that design continued to change according to each new issue we discovered, further in-person consultations, and every other week I was amending and circulating some other layout. We just kept having to find a way. So instead of bespoke furniture, we did a call out for donated furniture materials to upcycle, which increased the work to do but saved costs. And it encouraged more community businesses to get involved, such as the local pub who donated picnic benches, the scaffolders, the tyre shop. We knew the plants wouldn't fully bloom for another couple of years, and the yard was very grey and red-brown bricks, hodgepodge of different fence panels. So it looked like a builder's yard, and using colour was really important to us. So we painted them with our brand colours to provide like a cohesive look. And people do comment how smart our garden looks when they come. We chose a combination of planters that could provide interest at different heights and be upcycled quickly, like the tyre planters, or instant pops of colour like the flexi tubs, or that could be built easily and fill up the space. So we have trellis planters that provide screening for the neighbouring housing block. They're just donated scaffold and pallet boards. And we reduced the number of smaller planters in favour of longer ones, which also created walkways. And we also have square metre-ish planters for our micro allotments, which I will explain later on. Unfortunately, building planters requires 10 times more watering. So to try to conserve moisture in the soil, the gardening team lined planters with damp-proof membrane, then weed membrane. They used hugelkultur, which is putting logs in soil mix that decompose and release nutrients. And they focused on drought-tolerant plants. Like many community gardens, we have no running water. We'd already persuaded the council to let us tap into the housing blocks downpipes to divert rainwater into lots of water bots, which we expanded eventually to our shed and pergola roofs. And altogether, the Up Garden can store up to 7,300 litres of otherwise wasted rainwater. We have locks in the water bots and signage explaining that water is for plants, not for play. We have one unlocked community water bot for rainwater, and if anyone wants to bring water to add to it. We have two 20-metre long trench drains, which redirect groundwater from the asphalt surface to our play turf, and which also accidentally provides a popular gravel activity for children. And the micro-allotment planters straddle the trenches so that if there's any overwatering, that filters down to the trenches. But, you know, there were still lots of problems. The contractors had let the rolls of turf sit out for a week before laying it, contrary to their advice of 24 hours. We were watering from a kind neighbour's tap, but then there was a record-breaking hot summer, then there was reduced water pressure, and then a complete hose pipe ban. Our water bots were installed too late to have any reserves, and we just had to let the turf fend for itself. Fortunately, a couple of weeks before launch, it miraculously reappeared, which was really great motivation for the working group, which were now in its third iteration. They just lost their leader, and they just tore through just a ridiculously hot summer. We launched on 30th of October 2022. We had well over 100 visitors. We had live music, children's activities, planting session, and it was just really wonderful to see the people enjoying the space and seeing their reaction to the metamorphosis, and knowing that this was right on their doorsteps. The committee of local residents met for the first time, and they took over from the steering and working groups. Almost all of them had volunteered during the transformation, understood what it could do for the area, were keen to ensure it continued to serve the community's needs. And after agreeing a constitution and various other policies, we cracked on with figuring out how to deliver the final features that had got bumped down the launch date wish list. So you can see we added accessible planters, which were co-designed with a wheelchair user, a buggy shelter and biker scooter racks, which has a green roof on it. The most successful addition was a covered pergola, which helps people enjoy the space in hot or rainy weather. And it shelters a foosball table, which was there to attract teenagers, which it did and does. And then, so that was how the garden, there was it, No, I nearly forgot to say, there was another really successful addition, which was our wildflower bed. So that was like a really lumpy asphalt slab. So it was actually quite easy to, well, not that easy, but it wasn't as bad as some of the other areas to depave. And it really is nature's rainbow. It sort of starts with, you know, soil brown, then it gets sort of green in April. May, it's like purple. June becomes like red and white, and then so from June it sort of becomes like really, really yellow. And it attracts loads of bees, butterflies. We do have a butterfly bank elsewhere, but they actually prefer our micro allotment planters and the other edible plants. But you know, you live and learn. The play turf doesn't really produce wildflowers anymore because it's played on too often, but it's still really biodiverse. And last summer we discovered hovering sparrows diving down into it to eat grass seeds and bugs. Encouraging biodiversity is one of our key aims, and it's why we have a slightly lax weeding and pruning policy, unless the weed is dangerous or getting too big, or we've got a purpose for that space. We just let weeds be because wildlife finds them so beneficial, and we let our plants look probably quite bedraggled for much longer than other people would, because we try to leave pruning and deadheading until wildlife has got the most out of them. And so that is what the Up Garden looked like and operated as when we came across the Growing Together competition, which was 6 months after opening. And you can see there what the Growing Together Award was: to transform an unloved and unused local space. We were so new, still finding our feet, but we did think, oh, we've kind of done some of that stuff. And it said that every entrant would get a certificate, which is genuinely the only reason that we bothered to enter. We just wanted a nice certificate to display. So when they came to film us a couple of months later, the surprise was absolutely genuine when they announced at the end that we'd won. And Tayshan Hayden Smith, who's in the picture with the dreads, who's on the judging panel, he said that the story and the quick evolution of the Up Garden was so impressive that it just had to be recognised as the winner, a garden truly by the people for the people. And it goes to show what happens when the garden is seen as a fertile ground for change, beauty and local activism. I'll talk more about why I think we won. Spoiler alert, it's the community aspect in the next section and what we've done since the award. But I think now is a good point to stop for the Q&A on anything I've just talked about between the germination of the idea and winning the award. So I will come out and try to stop sharing my screen. Has it stopped?
Yeah, does anyone want to kick things off? I've got some questions, but does anyone just
yes, please. A very quick
yes,
one.
go ahead, Sue.
It's amazing what you've done. In the
Oh,
beginning, what sort of organisational structure were you in relation to, being able to legally sort of have discussions and a voice? Yeah.
So at the point I first went to the council, I was just a resident, like just a person with a few other voices behind me. The application for the grant had to be done in the name of Newham because I couldn't apply as an individual. And so it was effectively their project and they appointed me as a project manager, which was very unusual because obviously I wasn't a council employee. But somehow it worked. And so technically, up until the point the committee formed at launch, there was no entity. It was just Newham Council getting a grant for Newham land and random residents helping them along with it. We formed a committee at launch, and I know it's pretty typical to be a CIC or a CIO or a registered charity. We were and remain a constituted, we do have a constitution, but unregistered non-profit association. So we have no legal status as such, and there are real negatives to that. It massively reduces the amount of funding that we're eligible for. We're kind of, we sort of end up in the same category as Saturday football clubs effectively. But there are reasons for that. So we are a small group of residents. There is time, as I'm sure some of you will know, there is time involved in applying for registered status, maintaining registered status, greater obligations on you. And there just wasn't the appetite to take that on and feel confident we could maintain it, even if we had a bit of oomph at the beginning. It's also meant that it's kept our expectations a bit more reasonable. We sort of just don't go so crazy because obviously we are sort of quite limited in the funding that we can go for. We did consider the negatives. Obviously, it does mean that we're personally liable. If something were to go wrong, we have public liability insurance. But I think, this sounds so odd because I'm a lawyer, because I'd be, extremely risk averse, and I am in general. But I think you also need to look at the likelihood of something happening. And, we have our public liability insurance, we have our weekly volunteers, maintaining the space and checking stuff out. And so, it's unlikely that something would happen that wouldn't be covered by an insurance, that they would have to come after us. And so sometimes I think you just have to be a little bit, you know, get your hands a bit dirty and maybe not do everything quite by the book. As much as the ex-lawyer and the OCD in me, you know, is horrified by this idea. There's definitely a case of, like a very small example was, there was graffiti on one of the walls that faces inwardly into the up garden, and we wanted to cover it up. Now, we knew what we should do is go to the council, say we've spotted this, we want to paint it. The thing is, if that happens, and then gets escalated up loads and loads of panels and boards who all have to have their say, who want you to risk assess. And so we just painted it. We just went ahead and painted it, and we figured, look, it looks a million times better. One, they're not going to notice it. Two, if they do notice it, what they're going to do now we've already painted it. You know, sometimes it's better just to pray for forgiveness after.
Thank you.
Just a couple of things to add to that as well. So I'm actually organising a webinar led by the experts at NCVO around legal status for registered charities, all the, you know, the CIO, CIC stuff that Sue's mentioned, as well as the constituted community groups, because so many groups have been getting in touch asking for advice on that, what structure to choose and stuff. So we thought, let's just organize this and help people if they've got questions on that. And the other thing was on what you said about that Newham was happy to engage with you as an individual. I have heard from some people in other boroughs that the council would only engage with them once they were a constituted community group. So it's kind of like a borough by borough situation there. So yeah, you were quite fortunate there with Newham being more flexible and kind of like, a bit more open-minded about that. But just wanted to put that out there in case anyone is. Yeah.
And I think it can also be really dependent on the particular staff member that you have at the time.
Yeah.
And the policies that the council have at that particular time, what sort of leadership they're under. You know, there's a lot of luck involved in all this stuff.
Absolutely. Anna, do you have a question?
Well, it was more a remark really, because in my sort of previous lives, that was what I used to do, was advise mainly CICs, but also CIOs and you know, registered charities and community groups. And generally speaking, the advice boiled down to don't do it. You know, so make yourself a registered, you know, a constituted community group as soon as possible, which is quite easy to do, and you can also change it. You know, okay, you need to have a committee and everybody agrees changes, but you can change it, because once you're a charity, you have to remain a charity. There's very little options for changing it. If you're not looking to expand greatly, which if you are a community garden and that's your space, you know, you're not going to physically going to expand. You might do some other things, you know, plant sales and things, but you're not going to. So I just really think that the risks are small, you know, providing you've got the right kind of insurance, and it's worth maybe spending a little bit more on insurance than you feel entirely comfortable with, to make sure that it covers all your volunteers and everything. Then just that, stay as you are. Much more comfortable, and you don't have to do two sets of accounts.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Anna. I wanted to ask, I had a couple of questions. So you mentioned that all the delays that your group experienced along the way before the launch, and that you had to go through several iterations of the steering committee because people couldn't, you know, their commitments changed and stuff. I was wondering, sort of, how did you manage both like your volunteers' expectation and engagement, and also like sort of the community's expectation and engagement throughout these delays? Like, because I guess people might have felt quite frustrated, so how do you sort of keep the motivation going? And
Yeah. Not that it's that important, but it was the working group that kept going through the iteration. So the steering group was like the council people that stayed as it was. It was the local residents. I think what really helped was just being really open and honest upfront of, we've never done this before. We don't know anyone who's never done this before on this scale. And we had sort of this timeline that was set out at the beginning. There was, on that timeline, I had built in contingency time. I knew what I wanted to achieve, but, so that helped because it never looked as desperate as in my head it was, because, I'd sort of done some sort of quite vague milestones. So that helped. But yeah, I think just being really honest and open upfront and how we're all muddling through this together, I think that also really gave people responsibility and ownership, the ones that wanted it anyway. And so, people sort of really sort of pushed up their sleeves. There's a very sort of Dunkirk spirit about the whole thing. And also, like, you just have to have a lot of grace with volunteers. Like, you just have to know at the beginning that any one of them could drop out at any second. And it is quite the culture shock because, I'd spent quite a long time having, a whole team of minions contractually obligated to, if I say jump, they say how high. And suddenly it's a case of, can you please? It would be ever so nice if you could, la, la, la. And then, when they, tell you, 2 hours before, yeah, something's come up, you're just like, you can't even be annoyed. You just got to be like, okay, thank you so much. Bear it in mind next time. So yeah, you just have to really adjust like your attitude, your expectations, have plan Bs. For any task that you're doing, have like too many people. It's easier to let people and say, feel free to come along. It'll all happen quicker if you can, but actually we don't need as many people than to sort of be scrambling around at the time, because you needed 5, you asked for 5, and now you've got 2. But I'm also trying to remember when we had yes, I set up the Instagram from about the April, I think it was. So that helped give people updates on how we were doing and sort of showing the hard work. So, I think also just because it's a community project, people have a lot of sort of generosity. And ultimately, they'd never had this all that time in terms of the wider community. So they weren't, us delaying it wasn't delaying anything. Do you know what I mean? It didn't have
they weren't losing something.
They didn't have anything. So whether they got it was just whether they get it sooner or later. But yeah, it was just that it was the volunteers you wanted to take care of the most.
Thanks. Derek, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, and Susan, I love that. I love what you've done, and it's a great presentation as well. Thanks. I was just kind of interested from the community perspective of how to what degree were you able to engage sort of the full diversity of the local community in the project, and also how representative of the community sort of the sort of end users have proven to be?
I think that would be a really good question in the next bit, because I am going to cover a little bit of that, and I would like to expand. So can you please ask that question again once I've covered the content, because you've raised a point that I haven't fully covered actually in my slides, and so we can cover it then actually during the end Q&A.
Great, thanks.
Well, thank you. I have one more question if no one else does. I was curious about the consultation, and you mentioned that engagement was so much higher than the ones that the council had done, and that I was curious about sort of why do you think that engagement was so much higher? And also, I was really interested in, like the paper surveys that you gave to the people who lived in the estate, which I think is a brilliant idea. But I've also heard from other friends groups that like, even when they've done paper surveys, like they feel the engagement is like lower than they would hoped for. So I was just curious if you had any tips for how you think that what worked so well.
So starting with the paper one, it was like, I think, oh God, how many did I print off? I think I printed off something like 200 as a starter, expecting, to have to keep refilling it. And I think we got like 7 or 8 in the end. But then I also don't know how many of those residents actually decided to do the electronic version. So
Right.
that's something I can't know. So that what helped was the housing association manages the housing blocks on the estate, and they had agreed to do the one lot of hand delivering for me, so they did that. But yes, I agree that for community gardens in general, like the efforts of hand delivering flyers it's I do it once a year when we do sort of a volunteering and events flyer in sort of about April-ish, and I tend to be the main person, and it's like was it 5? It was 500 last few years. I did 1,000 this year, and it's like
Wow.
you lose half a day
Yeah.
to just watching all the way through, but it's important to
Mhm.
keep reaching the new people that have moved in. Like, you just don't know what's happened in the interim, and you've got to keep your volunteers, like, you've got to keep the directory sort of refreshed, because
Yeah.
people's lives change. So yeah, no, I understand that it can be really disheartening when you're like putting all this effort and you're getting like a low response. Why I think so on that, I think you just have to accept, like, you have to decide for yourselves. You're probably going to get a low outcome. It's going to take this much effort. Like, you've got to find for yourself where on the scale of how important it is to sacrifice that time to get those voices. And it's going to be different for every group, because everyone has different volunteers with different capability and availability. So, I think that's my response on that. As to why I think we got better engagement than the council, I think it's a mix of things. I think one, the subject content, like getting a new community space for free, like, quite often community consultations are about taking something away.
Yeah.
Which you should be more fired up about, I think, but for some reason, no. I think also the council doesn't have its eye on its residents and how they're actually engaging. So I know that Newham has a Facebook account that it hasn't posted on since 2022. I know it relies on Twitter and Instagram, which are pre-scheduled posts. And if the different departments don't feed into the comms department about the different things they're all doing, then that content will not make it onto the mainstream. Like, they just rely on their individual newsletters, which doesn't have the same reach as the tens of thousands that the council has on its main engagement. I don't really think they post often enough. Like, you can't just post once and then expect all of your residents to have seen it that one time. I think there's also an element of, and this is with sympathy to the council, they have so much content to push out that who goes to their local council's Twitter feed to have a good old time scrolling through, and even when you're on your feed, there's loads of posts from everything. It's so easy to kind of ignore. So whereas we didn't have Facebook back then, we did have Twitter, we had Instagram. Our Instagram following, because of the way that our story was shared, it was of people who were very specifically invested in the story of the Up Garden and what was going to happen. So obviously our following was, 90% highly interested, engaged people. That helps because I have, a sort of dedicated audience already. I was also doing a lot on WhatsApp, and WhatsApp has lots of disadvantages. There's lots of things I hate about it, but because of previous community work I'd already done, like I guess people know the sort of content I'm going to come out with, that it's usually relevant and helpful and positive for the community, or looks out for them in some kind of way. And that kind of goodwill really helps because, people were paying attention to my posts, whereas the same thing by Neura might not have got the same kind of traction.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Right. Any other questions, or should we go on to the next section? I don't see any hands up. So yeah, should we carry on?
Yeah, right. Let me attempt to get back into it, and it might show the fuller version, and then it should pop back out. Right. Can you see the last slide that we were on?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So the Up Garden is it's open every day from around 9 till 6. We shut for like 5 days over like Christmas and New Year. And we reduced to 4 p.m. For daylight savings time. And that is to be as accessible to as much of our community as possible, who have different work schedules, obligations, and lifestyles. I completely understand community gardens that are only open when they have volunteers to look after the space. That is a completely understandable position to take. It's the most usual one that you come across because you've got your hard work in there and you want to look after stuff. But we wanted to take a gamble on public trust. Like it's the Up Garden is like a real life social experiment in what happens when you have a large unmonitored space just for people to enjoy and do with. But pausing on that, and the other thing we do is that, well, as long as we can get funding, we also run events to bring the community together, socialize, create those really important micro connections. We showcase local talent, other initiatives, but it also does the crucial job of reminding people that the Up Garden exists. It's a great place to hang out, even when we don't have events, and encourage others to host their own events there, which increases its use and introduces it to a different audience. And we are really proud that from this space being absolutely nothing for decades and used by no one, that we now have daily visitors. We have a community gardening drop-in every week. In term time, there's an urban forest school in the after school slot is free, which operates twice a week. During most of the term holidays, we have a weekly family activities session. And at the same time, that session is also used to highlight other local initiatives. So you can see in the bottom left circle under the pergola, that was a local mom who organised messages of welcome. It was a greater campaign that she participated in, which was letter writing to asylum seekers in hostels. But we've also done other grassroots, like the local grassroots queer groups, sustainability groups, drama groups. We've even had circus acts. And then we also have a big quarterly community gathering that has the same sort of family activities and live local music, local acts to mark each season. All of those are free in order to be as accessible as possible. That may have to change in the future because doing funding applications requires volunteer time. And if you're successful, managing the funded projects requires even more time. But for as long as we're able to make it happen, we will keep our events free. Locals have their own private celebrations there. And we've also been chosen to host larger scale events. So in 2023, the council's official coronation event for our ward brought maybe 500 to 600 attendees. We were bursting at the seams. Last year, we were part of Forestgate Pride Weekend, where we had about 450. And actually this weekend on Sunday, the council has again chosen the Up Garden to host the ward's garden party to celebrate them being 60 years of a borough. And they're expecting about 450 again. We don't yet charge for use. And instead, we just require that they use as many local contributors as possible, because that contributes to like a green and circular economy, and it strengthens community goodwill. And also with the council, there's like a weird situation of, I'm not feeling a bit awkward about potentially charging our own landlord for use of the space. So we're just not going to go there. And yeah, so I think that's kind of the Up Garden's greatest success. It's like, it's not the transformation or the sustainability or the biodiversity that we've achieved. I'm super proud of all of those. It's how the space so easily facilitates new connections. At the events that I've mentioned, like we do see estate residents, who passed each other by, that they now have an opportunity to introduce themselves and chat. We see, children make instant best friends, don't they? And you see parents swapping details to arrange play dates. And we know that these connections don't just happen during our events. From like anecdotes, we know that, we see families taking over the Mud Lab, and we see, council workers having their, breaks on the picnic benches, and we see the teenagers that hang out under the pergola, the households that, tend to their micro allotments. And we know that after a while, they start to recognise each other in the garden, they'll brave a smile or a wave, and then they'll spot each other on the high street and like say a hello. And, it's just so wonderful to hear people say that seeing more familiar, friendly faces is making them feel like, safer and happier in the community, especially the ones that live on their own, the ones that don't have family nearby, or, they've just moved to the area. I think my loveliest thing is just take a drink. So we have an incredible group, a tiny group of volunteer gardeners. Half are on our committee, the other two are kind of regular stalwarts. None of them knew each other prior to the Up Garden, even though they lived on adjacent streets for decades. And for 2 years, they've met every single week, pretty much, for, so watering, tinkering, like half-time biscuits. And they are now firm friends. And I just think it's so incredible to know that the Up Garden provides something to them more than what they can do in their own gardens, which they have. But there's something, to say for, communal gardening. I mentioned that the Up Garden is unmonitored. So our biggest risk is antisocial behaviour. ASB thrives on a lack of witnesses or disempowered witnesses. And so our best shield is having visitors in there as much as possible so that, the naughty mischief makers move along. They're not going to stop what they're going to do, but they're not going to do it in the Up Garden. We have a rota of about 10 locals who unlock every morning. They do checks and lock up on an evening, and about half a dozen who maintain the garden's furniture weekly. That's the ones I just mentioned before, and they ensure that our yard looks smart and welcoming as possible. And to encourage daily visitors, we try to ensure that there is something for everyone as far as possible. It's really important to think actively about inclusivity and accessibility, even when it comes to planting. So I mentioned the weekly community gardening drop-in. It's open to all ages and deliberately timed for an after-school slot. It is more popular with older residents. They are the regular stalwarts, but we do get intergenerational socialising happening, which is, just so fab to see. And then, so on the estate and the surrounding area, lots of the flats have no gardens. Some of them, just have like tiny balconies. I'm not sure if some maybe don't even have that. So we have a micro allotment scheme. So we've got 6 square metre planters. That's the central circle that you can see. And they are for anyone who does not have a garden to borrow on a rolling basis for free and to grow food. As long as you're looking after it, you're allowed to borrow it ad infinitum. And it's wonderful to see those households harvesting food to eat at home. The people who are on that scheme, there's like solo retirees, there's empty nesters, there's young families, they cover like a real range of backgrounds. I mentioned the 2 accessible planters, they're included in the scheme. They're being looked after by the weekly gardeners until someone with access needs applies. We want to keep that available for them instead of giving it a different purpose. Wherever possible, our water butt taps are at a wheelchair user height. The latches on our public shed are on a height that they could reach so that they can access our gardening hand tools. There's removable baskets on the sides of the planters, which means that they can go to the shed, fill it up with the tools and come back rather than, I've forgotten something, or I can't carry enough to and fro. We added plastic grids to our turf so that people in wheelchairs can cross over it more easily. And all of our walkways are at least the minimum recommended width, if not much wider, actually. Most of our planters are at about 80 centimetres height, which our older community and micro-allotment gardeners appreciate. But we do have 2 shorter square metre planters aimed at children. So one has raspberries and blackcurrants for anyone to help themselves to. The other was loaned to the Urban Forest School I mentioned. They planted sweet peas and nasturtiums. They nurtured them each week. It taught them about patience and resilience and problem solving when the birds ate all the seeds and they had to try again. And then they got to harvest it to enjoy. What else we have? Oh, the tire planters are really popular with preschoolers because they're so low and they're super colourful. The buggy shelter, I said, has a green roof. That's got strawberries and mint at the moment. And we have the bike and scooter racks because the area is really popular with young families who want to know that, as their kid is running around, they don't have to drag this buggy around the whole place. And that, bikes and scooters can be locked safely because it's quite a large area if you're at one end away from the other. That also helps to keep the walkways clear when we have really big events. And it encourages sustainable transport, which is excellent. We made sure that we had a range of seating. So there's higher benches for those who find it hard to bend all the way down. We have low seats for children. We have some seating that's got backs and some with arms for those with mobility issues or feeding parents. And we've got lightweight chairs that people can move into their own social arrangements. We have a foosball table that is protected under the covered wooden pergola, which, it's for everyone, but it's specifically aimed at tweens and teenagers to ensure that there's, an offering for them. And, it is something that they're sort of instantly drawn to. So we know, we got that right. We decided to retain the original laundry poles because it was a laundry yard for their history, and as a nod of respect to the long-standing residents on the estate. We don't want to erase the history of what it was. Unfortunately, we've ended up with the slowest growing wisteria in the world. So whilst waiting for that's going to be a natural pergola eventually. We've trialled a calabash project on them last summer, which was great. You can see that in the bottom right circle there. We have a grapevine project, and we've also got a tea plant project because one of our committee members runs a tea business just a few streets away. So we're hoping we might be able to have the Up Garden tea, which would be amazing. But it's also just a really fun way to highlight to visitors a really community-minded local business. So, again, we're bringing that community aspect in different ways via what we have in the Up Garden. And then our most recent projects they're all aimed at encouraging, more visitors to use the Up Garden independently, because again, when Monitor Space, we're not there to help curate their activities for them or how they use the space. We also wanted to bring science, literature and art here, given what I said about the top 20% neighbourhood for, poverty, etc. But, with an eye on accessibility and equity. So we have a self-led nature trail. That's the top one. You can see the post in the background with the sort of a plaque. So you can scan a QR code to learn educational information about each species that's featured on it. But if you don't have a phone, then you can also engage with it by hunting for them all. They're sort of, I don't know what the word is, but they're sort of indented. So you can take rubbings, which kids really love doing. You just need some paper and a fat crayon. And they're sort of dotted all around. So they're quite fun to sort of go explore. There's 2 really hard ones that always, keeps them sort of guessing, trying to find the last 2. We added a piano in a weatherproof cabinet, which that was intended to break down barriers to access to music. Pianos are an ideal gateway instrument because the scale is set out left to right rather than guitars and wind instruments where you've got to know the right combination to do the right notes. But they're expensive, they're large and heavy. If you live in an upstairs flat, what's the chances of getting a piano up there? Children are really drawn to it. There's a local dad who comes to play because he's always loved piano playing, but he just doesn't have one in his house. And actually this weekend on Saturday, 2 local piano teachers, they've come together to host a recital for their students to give them performance experience, which is what you would get if you were in a formal music school. But because they teach in their living rooms, they don't have that. But by having this piano, we're able to give this experience to them, which, it's just a lovely way for them to use it in their own way. We're not involved in that other than, sharing, helping them with, some queries and risk assessments and sort of sharing the flyer. We also have a vintage phone box that was donated to us during the creation of the Up Garden. And actually on our website, there's a page that shows you the transformation because it looked awful when we first got it. And that was painstakingly transformed into a book exchange. So anyone can donate, borrow or take books. We do have a library on our high street, but this is a more convenient option for the people who live nearby who have mobility issues or limited time, as long as you're quite flexible with what reading material happens to be in there at any particular point of time. And the selection of books, it does change from week to week. So we do know it is being well used. Saying that, despite all of those efforts, we have had instances of antisocial behaviour, of course. And in particular, this is a bit of a silver lining story, I think. A couple of years ago, we had a spate of low-level vandalism, and it was easy to pinpoint the perpetrators because the local teenagers had graffitied their own nicknames, which they had told us their nicknames not that long before, so we knew exactly who it was, and they would come in their uniform. So we reported them to their school, who wanted to ban them from the Up Garden and bring in the police to speak to them, which was it was slightly ridiculous. Like, firstly, a ban. How would that have been enforced? We're an unmonitored space. Like, who's going to know when they're there at any particular time? And then also, I think going so heavy-handed, involving the police would have just created a them and us situation. And what we need is an us and us situation. So instead, we suggested a community service workshop where the teenagers came to help us paint over the graffiti. They helped to upcycle the replacement furniture. And this gave us a really good amount of time with them for them to get to know us, know that we're volunteers, know that vandalism has real consequences, such as extra work for us. And in the worst case, it could lead to us shutting down. So they'd have nowhere to hang out. They were genuinely remorseful. And they've actually since adopted the Up Garden as their after-school base, which they're actually pretty protective of against other groups of teenagers. So that's been a real win for us. And I think in the grand scheme of things, if I think about every minute of every day that the Up Garden has been open for the last 2.5 years, like the number of ASB incidents, it's really been de minimis. And so I think it really does prove that people overwhelmingly will respect public spaces if they feel welcoming and cared for. I think that's sort of the important point there. So this is our committee. Well, it's 9. It's 9 of the 12 of us. So we oversee the direction of the Up Garden. We ensure we're meeting our aims. We're carrying out, community engagement and organising events. And I think it's really important to point out that ideas like the community service upcycling workshop, making the place welcoming and accessible to different demographics, having a micro-allotment scheme, those ideas do not occur instantly to all of us. It's important that we represent a range of backgrounds and lived experiences so that we're representing our community, because you come with your inherent biases and experiences, and you're not always aware of what you don't know, which I think sort of speaks for itself. Now, we did consider having an open committee where anyone could join, which I think is the case at lots of community gardens, which I completely totally get. On the face of it, it's the most fair and democratic. Everyone is welcome. However, what I'd sort of got from my research from community gardens and had seen actually during the creation phase of the Up Garden with the general volunteers is the people who are most likely to have the time and resources to volunteer are generally middle class. They have the flexible working, or they're retirees, or they're on parental leave. They are generally white. And as far as the general volunteering goes, then we are happy to have anyone and everyone. The more, the merrier. But in order to ensure that our community retains an equitable share of voices, we decided to keep it a closed committee, which means that we recruit on a one-by-one basis, getting to know our visitors, who could be a voice that's not yet represented, or at least it wouldn't unbalance the representation that we do have. But it's tricky, it's not an ideal solution. It takes far more time. We definitely haven't grown our committee as fast as we wanted to. We're limiting massively our pool of potential committee members when, basically every community garden ever, we could do with more people to share the workload. And it is important to stay flexible. And if we have to adjust our approach, we'll do so. But for now, we are trying not to compromise that current committee recruitment policy. Having a diverse committee means we have different lifestyles, availability, capacity. And so to accommodate that, our committee meetings are every 2 months, and they take place in 3 parts. So firstly, there's an in-person meeting in the evening, where people can also Zoom in. And then the following afternoon, one of those members relays a summary at the weekly community garden drop-in, because there are other committee members who are at the drop-in who struggle with evening meetings for basically medical and language reasons. And then within a few days, the meeting note is circulated to everyone on the committee, so that anyone who could not make either of the meetings can catch up and give their feedback by WhatsApp, which is our main mode of group communication in between the bi-monthly meetings. It is faffy, I won't lie, it's faffy, but so far we've found it a worthwhile approach for us and what we try to stand for. And that's really borne out by the fact that the ones who engage by the afternoon meeting, the next day one, and who read the meeting notes and come back, those are really worthwhile voices for us to have. And that's why we carry on doing it. So hopefully you can see how the problems on the estate caused by the urban planning decisions made decades ago, and which prevented a sense of community from forming, created issues which ultimately led to the Up Garden becoming the solution to that. Already being connected to my community meant that I was aware of the issues and that people actively wanted a solution. That being involved in the community in other ways also helped in getting a quick and a large response to the initial consultation. Doing the consultation online and in person was important to be inclusive and accessible as much as possible, and demonstrating that the initial and the ongoing community input has informed the design and features of the Up Garden. They could see that the layout had changed on the graphics. This gave the community a sense of ownership in the project, and that also, I think, helped garner the large volunteer response we had during the creation phase. Approaching local businesses, it's not just about residents. Your businesses are also a part of your community. They donated unwanted materials and furniture, which also strengthened community pride in the project. And you shout out their name, and they really appreciate that kind of extra kind of attention and thanks and potential custom. As I mentioned, inclusivity and accessibility are built into many of the features of the Up Garden, from the opening hours to the range of seating to the micro allotment scheme. And I feel that that's been achieved, well, partly or maybe wholly, through diverse representation on our committee. But that in itself requires an inclusive and accessible approach to meetings, to getting feedback, to communications, and how we're finding new members. Looking at the recent additions, they've also been focused on attracting more of the community to the Up Garden and providing access to experiences they may not get otherwise, such as the community piano. And as our future looks, any future features will, we will have community at their core, and try to keep this mindset and trying to think as much as we can about different experiences, and how they would want to interact or enjoy them would affect how we deliver them. Our events and engagement help us to connect with our community and bring them together. And they create the micro connections and the support networks and the firm friendships that will survive even if the Up Garden does not, which I think is a really crucial point to know. That I obviously don't want the Up Garden to end any day soon, but if it did, the really key things that we've managed to achieve will continue past us. That is the future point I mean about community, not just literally what we're planning on in the next year or so. And so that's why I think the Up Garden was the first winner of the RHS and the BBC's Grown Together Award, because our approach to being a community garden is that it's less about the gardening and it's more about the community. And so I hope you can see that the concept of community and the engagement that you carry out it's really relevant, whether it's the past or the present or the future of your project. So I will end my slide.
Derek, why don't we go to your question now, as Suze suggested? So I think it was around like, how do you measure diversity, or how do you you ask it.
I think actually, I think you answered it tenfold actually. It was about kind of how you can engaged sort of the diversity of the local community in the first place, and you can sort of see that visibly, and how you talked about it, and then onward how you sort of ensure you've got that kind of full representation in terms of your end users. But you've talked about it in volumes, and I'm genuinely really impressed. I think it's amazing what you've done.
Thank you. So the point which you reminded me, the point that I didn't already have in my slides is, so I would say that we definitely want more South Asian representation than we currently have. We've got a very strong South Asian, particularly Muslim community, and you know, we do have South Asian representation, but not in the, it's not, I would say it's not, there's one person, which doesn't really reflect how South Asian our immediate community is. And I remember there were some early conversations of frustration with some of the members, not in anger, just, oh, why? And saying, you know, we've done so much hand flyering, we've got posters everywhere, you know, we're right on their doorsteps. You know, why don't we have, you know, more people involved? And I think there's different aspects there, some of which I sort of knew from my own, how I was brought up in a very sort of, you know, well, as diverse as 1980s Leeds could be. But also what I've learned through my community work in the last few years, which is, and I can only speak to this particular local community. I'm not going to say it applies, you know, nationwide, but a lot of the community who are in the estate, you know, if you live in a council estate, chances are it's because you don't have a high income. That's why you're living on a council estate. You know, you're in a smaller, you know, kind of flat. You don't get a garden, that kind of thing. So chances are that you are working long hours, maybe double shifts. You may not have the kind of time that, you know, someone who's in a more comfortable position has to give. I also know that lots of the Muslims are practicing Muslims, you know, they go to their local mosques and they do community work there. You know, they're very involved with joining in with what's provided there. And just because I don't see it, because I don't go to the mosque, doesn't mean it's not happening. And so it's not a case of, oh, they're, you know, we don't see them turning up at our volunteer events as much. But what are they already doing that you're not seeing? And, you know, being sort of sensitive to those kind of situations. But it is tricky. It is tricky because you want to be visibly representative, although I'm not white, I've had a very British upbringing, and there's a slight discomfort about white saviourdom. I'm not sure there's a perfect answer other than, even though we get low uptake, I would say, we still feel it's always worth trying, and that's why we do the hand delivering around the estate. It's why we, you know, try to keep working on connections with, you know, local mosques, because, you know, you just want to allow the opportunities to happen, whether they get taken up or not, and just being, you know, gracious and trying to understand why different communities may not be in a position to give the same as other communities.
Well, I mean, I think great, really good consideration of like, and you have a very inclusive and empathetic approach, which is really, really commendable.
Thank you.
Liz, it looks like you've got a question.
Yes. What you've done is really amazing.
Ah, thank you.
And it has given me some ideas about how to communicate what my local friends committee does. We have problems with sort of organising meetings at the right time for everybody, and this idea of providing a sort of a summary of what we've been talking about at the end of meetings, I think I might consider. My other question too, I mean, I love all your book stuff, the piano, what was the other thing?
The nature trail.
Well, probably the nature trail. So I'm trying to think. And you've not missed anything, I don't think. I mean, I used to be a housing officer working on council estates, and to sort of pull this off is quite amazing. I think you're possibly lucky that was a plot of land available. There isn't always that, and just the fact that you've managed to sort of get people who've lived, as you said, near each other but never communicated, I think is a really great achievement. I'm getting quite emotional about it, really, for you. But I wanted to also know, it's obviously a lot of work that you've had to put in, and you said you were working really long hours. I presume you must have cut down your work hours, have you?
So I'm still a stay-at-home parent. There's other reasons for that. But yes, but I work, sometimes I work as long hours as when I was a lawyer. So yes, but I also do again unpaid community work for there's some other grassroots organizations I'm involved in locally. I'm just a bit of an idiot, I think, doing all this work for free. There is a plan. I do need to get paid employment, and I need to get it pretty soon. But yeah, it's just, you know, 2 young kids and this kind of be in my bonnet about public realm and what the Up Garden stands for, and the other grassroots groups I'm involved in, which are also very worthy. Like, it's really hard to sit on my hand when I see something that is happening, and like the Newham event that's happening on Sunday, this massive event, like I really could have done without that. But it's just such a great opportunity, you know, the reach that they have of introducing us to lots of new residents who've moved in since the last time we had a big event, which was 2 years ago. Like, that would take me so much like social media engagements and flyering and posters. So, you know, it's been hard work helping them with that, but you know, I'll sleep when I'm dead.
I also wanted to say something about your approach to the youth that had, you know, carried out graffiti and stuff. I think that's wonderful what you've achieved, because in so many parks we do get teenagers particularly wrecking things, and I think probably in my part we wouldn't be able to sort of trace them, actually, because it's quite a wide area from where people, you know, young people would come. But to actually sort of manage to do a more softly approach with them, but get them back in to your community and doing stuff is probably what the probation service sort of do, isn't it, with community
I think
service.
it's one of those things that's happened a lot with the Up Garden, where it's part luck, part our approach to things. So yes, we, you know, because we'd seen them in there and gone to chat to them in the first place, and, you know, just, you know, overheard their names or them calling each other. And then there was the luck element, which was that they were stupid enough to write their names on the graffiti. And, you know, they always come in their uniforms, like, right, I'm going to go, this is the person, sorry, teacher. But yeah, I think a lot of it is trying to put yourselves in their mindset and having empathy. And it's the easiest thing is to be annoyed and be like, oh, it's so stupid, why would they do that? And then you've got to think, well, I was stupid as a teenager. I didn't do as stupid as that, but I definitely was quite self-important and self-absorbed and didn't think about the consequences of things. And then you think about, well, why are they doing this versus something else? Well, one, you know, there is an unfortunate correlation between, you know, a poor area that we live in, and, you know, the propensity towards, you know, ASB and that kind of behavior. And then also just the complete decimation of youth centres and community centres. They're bored. They are so bored. Like, when they come, you know, now that they behave themselves, you know, they're not getting up too much. I mean, occasionally they're a bit lazy about littering when there's a bin right next to them, but, you know, in the scheme of things, they just want somewhere to hang out. They just want to be somewhere dry. They don't want to be someone breathing down their neck. They want to be able to chat about what they want to chat about, particularly the girls. Like, we do have like multi-use, you know, games areas and skate places quite nearby, but girls don't want all that. They just want somewhere to sit and be safe that's well lit.
Yeah. Thank you. Subo, it looks like you have a question.
Hi there, really nice to meet you. And I was just going to say thank you so much for sharing details of your project. It's absolutely amazing what you've done. Absolutely stunning of just the amount of engagement and the things that we've implemented as well. So I am a chair of a community group in South London. So we're in New Cross, and we're a constituted community group as well. We've just finished work on a 2-year project, not on the scale of yours. It's a lot smaller, but with a lot of the same premises, where we've recycled, reused, biodiversity, an area that was covered in fly tipping and dog fouling. And again, there's a lot of, it's been really important. This is a bit of a very culturally mixed area. There's a lot of, a Windrush generation here. We're also not far from the site of the New Cross fire. So there's obviously things we've done that are very sensitive, obviously, to the existing community. But it's been amazing. We've done it as 2 groups working together, which had its challenges in itself. Obviously, you couldn't agree on everything. I think it's interesting to hear how Newham Council were with you, because one of our biggest obstacles was actually Lewisham Council blocking every idea, despite promoting biodiversity, blocking so much. And having that, I work full time, I've got a child as well, and I foolishly volunteered to lead the project, and have, like you've got to appreciate anyone who can help, and also have to do the work myself if I can't get people to do it. So there's been a lot of, I was completely burnt out in December. But it's just really interesting to hear, because one of the main problems we have at the moment is just, oh, hello, Laura. Our project is called Florence Green, and we're going to have like a celebration picnic, because just to kind of give everyone who's involved in the project a bit of a thank you, really. One of the biggest problems we have is ASB. So we have graffiti a lot on our road anyway, but it's one of the major ones we have is like dog fouling. Is just, we're doing the gentle approach, like, putting flags in poos, that sort of thing. It's gross, but with saying my dog owner is a bad person, or all of that, kind of putting quite a lot of humor into it. But even now, despite the area being so much nicer than it was, we've got a wildflower garden, we've got, like you, we've recycled, we had old enamel baths that we put into planters, and probably the bit that I love the most about it is someone had a crazy idea to get a boat, and we managed to get one. So we have a boat on the site with loads of plants in it, and a dog rose sail on it that's going at the moment. But yeah, ASB is, we also, I don't know if you experience this, what I wanted to find out was, like, we have people stealing plants as well. So there's all these kind of, like, putting deterrent planting in, but still, there's still, that's what I don't understand, is that it's so, like we didn't want to erase any of the history of the site. We've licensed photographs of the site before. Everyone thought it was bomb damage, and it wasn't. It was part of the Charles Booth poverty map, where houses were wrongly condemned as slum housing. So we're trying to educate everyone in the area, especially the children, and we've got a lot of young children engaged in making bug hotels and what. So, because I always think, I'm sure you do as well, they're like the future gatekeepers of the project. So absolutely. I've always tried, I've got their names up, and we've made bird boxes with their names on, so they can kind of take ownership of them. But it's just really lovely to see something like what you've done, because there's so many things we tried to do that we couldn't do, and just the fact that you've got all these people, like hundreds of people as well, coming is, well done. It's amazing. It looks fantastic, absolutely fantastic. I did have a really out there question, but you'd painted the tires. I was going to ask you what paint you used.
So I don't know where, I think it was just a bog standard primer. I don't know, maybe we Googled what a good primer would be from the internet. So I remember it was a white primer, and then we used some of it, we just used leftover paint. I think we were just chancing it. So some of it is Cuprinol.
Oh, it is, okay.
That's what we use on our very rough wood, because it really soaks in. And then some of it was the leftover paint from the mural, which I think is maybe some kind of a satin.
Okay. No, we've done it as well, but it's all come off. It's like we've had the same, so it's all like peeling off, and yours are like perfect. And I was like, oh gosh.
I mean, some of them look, a bit rougher now, but most of them actually have. I think it was the sanding and the priming.
Yeah, really I think maybe that's what we didn't do. I think, or maybe we need to revisit it.
But your project sounds great. That sounds
Thank you.
Really, really fun.
It's
New Cross, did you say?
New Cross, yeah. So we're SE14. We're near New Cross Station. The road's called Florence Road. So if you're ever passing by, do come and have a look, because we're trying to renaturalize the area, because we're old Victorian houses on here as well, but there's this blank space that's been empty.
I'll see if I can find any pictures of this boat. I'm intrigued by this boat.
The boat, I've got a picture. Actually, I'm doing a little invitation at the moment. I'll show you my boat. I can actually show you what it looks like.
Your point about the council, again, I think that's, part, you create your luck, but there is also luck involved.
Yeah.
So yes, yes, it helped that I'd already been quite engaged with that council staff member, so they knew, oh, she's a good egg, she's got the best interest at heart. It helps that I was a lawyer, and so I'm quite good at being persuasive and tenacious and over researching, but also there was a lot of luck. This was coming out the back of COVID. The council had a COVID recovery strategy, and I analysed that and took so many points and threw it back at them and said, you want to achieve this, and the same with their local plan. And I honestly don't know if it had been a different time, whether I would have been able to achieve it based on the local plan alone without the COVID recovery strategy. I just don't know.
It's hard, isn't it? Because one other problem we had was about harvesting rainwater. We had the same thing as you, where we, unfortunately, the buildings near us had inbuilt drainage pipes, so we couldn't get them to redirect water out. I spent about 18 months arguing with the council just to try and get some water butts in, and we eventually won, obviously, but it took so long. And then it's understandably, there's obviously it sounds like from what you said that you've signed over responsibility for your area. Is that right? Did you have to sign some, or if there's anything that happens or not? No, or they'll come and maintain it still.
So it is their land. It remains their land. We are just a bunch of residents that they allow to come and look after the space. We have no lease. We have no license. I suppose arguably there is an ongoing implied license through actions and some words, but nothing like concrete. And so we have public liability insurance and employers' liability insurance to cover, volunteers as well. And we obviously do our weekly checks or whatever to make sure that we catch anything that could be harmful. So that's where the situation with that is.
It's good, I think, because the community, in your sense, have been engaged so much that you probably have less of the ASB. We've tried, obviously, but you're always going to get, like you say, just what my dream in our area would be what I'd love to do long term is try and get community space centres open for children, because, like you say, that's why people start graffitiing or knocking down plants.
I think it will take time. I think it will take time, because if an area is known for dog fouling, then that will just happen until those people start moving away or moving on somewhere else. And if the new people who move in see it less, they're less likely to go and take their dog to the same place. You can hope. No one can actually know.
Thank you. Thanks again.
I see a comment from Laura about the tire planters, and yes, they are not recommended because of unsafe chemicals, which is why. So ours they've got weed membrane inside, and we don't use them for any edible plants. It's just
we do the same. Yeah, we do the same.
But we did have a good old debate about whether to have them at all, because plastic exists and releases stuff. But ultimately, it was like democracy, and we also wanted to show these were going to go to the tip. We wanted to involve a local business, and we needed some really, really quick, cheap, low-level planter solutions. So, there's arguments for using or not using tire planters.
That makes sense. Great. So it looks like we're. Does anyone else have any burning questions? Or I think we're a bit over time, so I don't want to eat up everyone's afternoon. But I've really enjoyed this conversation and discussion, both in the midway point and now. I think some really interesting things have come out of that. So Right, I think we'll probably leave it there. If anyone's got any burning questions afterwards, I think you've all got my email address, so just let me know and I can pass things on to Suze. But yeah, I just want to thank Suze first of all for this like really comprehensive and illuminating presentation, and thank all of you as well for all your questions and the discussions afterwards. It's been really interesting. I think I've learned a lot and have taken away so much myself, and I hope everyone, you know, feels inspired to try some new things as well. So yes, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much for having me. And also, like, I'll send Laura the slides if anyone wants a copy of those. It's got our, you know, website and handles, so feel free to go have a nosy on our website, check out our Instagram. There's like there's a video tour of the website if you click around a little bit, so you can see a bit more about what the space is. And if you're ever in, you know, Forest Gates, come pop along, open every day 9 till 6.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely must do that. And yeah, I've done recording. It'll take me a little while to process it and stuff like that, but I should be able to send it out next week. Yes, with Suze's slides as well. So brilliant. All right, thanks so much, everyone.
Brilliant.
Take
Nice
care.
to meet you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.